So, Texas Republican Wesley Hunt, not too happy with the John Lewis Voting Act. He actually goes, oh, voting is not hard. It's fairly easy. So he speaks before Congress, and if y'all want a good laugh, just listen to this black Republican.
Thank you, Chairman Durbin and Ranking Member Graham, for having me here today to speak about voting rights in America, the country that I love dearly. More importantly, I'm here to talk about the left's soft bigotry of low expectations. Because it's the Democrat Party, not the Republican Party, that thinks so little of black America as a people of color that they make the case that being black in America means we can't obtain a government ID to vote. And that's not only a ridiculous assertion, it's demeaning and it's insulting. When it comes down to it, many of my colleagues on the left like to pretend that we're still living in the 1950s. Well, we're not. I've got some good news for you. It's 2024, and I know what year it is because I've been black for just over 40 years. And I'm also the son of a retired lieutenant colonel who grew up in the segregated South. You see, my parents grew up in a Jim Crow South in the 50s and 60s in New Orleans, Louisiana. Their next generation, my parents had 3 kids. My sister, brother, and I all went to West Point, all 3 of us. We all served our country in combat. And I sit before you today as a sitting United States congressman in a district in a suburb of Houston, Texas, that's a white majority district, that President Trump would have won by 25 points, and I won by almost 30 points. And that doesn't happen unless we've made some incredible progress in this great nation. Now, my colleagues on the left like to say that common sense voting laws, including requiring a government-issued ID, are racist, discriminatory, and burdensome. Do you know what my father had back in the 40s and 50s before it was even cool? A government-issued ID. And continuing in his footsteps, I, too, have multiple government-issued IDs. And while that might be shocking to many people in this country, people may ask, how's that happen? It's very simple. It's personal responsibility for all Americans in this country, regardless of what you look like. Sitting with me today is my global entry card, my military ID card, my Texas driver's license, my Texas license to carry, because that's how we roll in Texas, my congressional card, and of course, the good old-fashioned American passport. What sorcery is this? What am I, the black Houdini? How was I able to pull off the impossible and attain not 1, not 2, not 3, but 6 government-issue IDs? Personal responsibility in this country. I fought for this country as an Apache helicopter pilot to protect free and fair elections, and having a government-issued ID isn't racist, it's American. You need to have an ID to drive a car, to check into the airport, open a bank account. You need an ID for basically everything to be a responsible adult in this country, except for voting, apparently, according to the left. Black America does not need well-meaning liberals putting their arms around us and telling us how we should go to the polls. In fact, if you look at recent headlines and polls, you will find that black men specifically in this country are more fired up than ever to participate in the next presidential election. And I think I know why, and I'm really looking forward to these results. For the record, in the 2022 midterms in Georgia, it proved that election integrity and ballot accessibility can be achieved hand in hand. After the 2020 election, Georgia passed a voter election integrity law, and subsequently, the Department of Justice filed a lawsuit against the state of Georgia, alleging that the Georgia law is discriminatory and aims to restrict citizens from voting. President Biden even called this law, and I quote, Jim Crow 2.0. Really? In my humble opinion, referencing Jim Crow for common sense election integrity laws is offensive to those who actually experienced Jim Crow, like my parents and their parents before them. In fact, the law wasn't discriminatory at all, because in the 2022 midterms, Georgia voters shattered voter turnout records across the state. And despite that record-breaking turnout in Georgia, the DOJ lawsuit is still pending. I suspect that it's because that record-breaking turnout.
All right, I couldn't hear enough of that bullshit any longer from Wesley Hunt. So let me explain to you. So maybe Wesley will understand this better if I put this on, because he wants to sit here and talk about his parents and him being from Texas and him being from a suburb of Sugar Land that's a majority white district that I almost won by 30,000 points, and I've got 6 voter IDs, and y'all notice he kept talking about personal responsibility. People just have some personal responsibility, and so that's really the problem. And then these liberals saying that black people they can't get a voter ID. See, that's the language they always use. Go to my iPad. New analysis, folks. This was last year. Millions of Americans lack forms of ID that are increasingly required to vote. What you will not hear from the Wesleys of the world is that key finding in the analysis. As of 2020, nearly 29 million voting age U.S. citizens did not have a non-expired driver's license, and over 7 million did not have any other form of non-expired government-issued voter ID. It says in states with strict voter identification laws, including Georgia, Indiana, Kansas, Mississippi, Tennessee, and Wisconsin, over 3 million voting age U.S. citizens did not have a current driver's license, and over 1 million did not have any non-expired government license. Oh, it says right here, more than 11 million young people did not have a current driver's license, and more than 3 million did not have any unexpired government ID. Now, keep reading. 18, 19-year-olds. You see them talking about their ability to be able to vote. Then you see right there, as they continue to talk about the numbers there, the underrepresented groups. It says that an estimated 1.86 million black and non-Hispanic Americans, 1.86 million Hispanic Americans lack a photo ID. 4.5% of those who identify as Native American. This compares to just 2.3% of white non-Hispanic and 1.6% of Asian. Keep it on there. You heard Wesley Bell talk about, oh, you got to have an ID to open a bank account. Well, the reality is it's a lot of people in America who don't have bank accounts. Then you see it says right here, the analysis found a strong relationship between income and lack of a driver's license, with adult Americans earning less than $30,000 lacking a driver's license at a rate about 5 times greater than the highest income category of 100,000 or more. So let me go ahead and put it to you like this. The sheer arrogance of a Wesley Hunt is he wants to sit here and go, oh, I have this ID and this ID and I got a passport. Hey, Wesley, since you want to be a smart ass, why don't you tell people how much a passport costs? Oh, that could be it. Hey, Wesley, why don't you tell people how the laws are written, such as in Ohio, when they required birth certificates in order for you to get the ID, and the birth certificate had to be a certain paperweight. Do you want to talk about how many older voters who could not vote because when they were born in Jim Crow hospital, since you want to bring up Biden and Jim Crow, how they couldn't access their birth records. So therefore, and remember, oh, by the way, Wesley, since Yola ass from Texas, there are 2 types of birth certificates. There's the original birth certificate, and there's a birth certificate from the Bureau of Vital Statistics. Some states actually required the original birth certificate, the one where they used to have the 2 feet on the actual birth certificate, and they would actually specify in some of the laws how the seal needed to be raised, and then they would say that a certificate from the Bureau of Vital Statistics, that wasn't applicable. Oh, I noticed how you skipped over all of that. I noticed how you skipped over when Pennsylvania passed their voter ID law, how they then said that in order for you to, if you did not have an ID, you had to then go to the center, appear in person, fill out an affidavit, go back home, apply for your voter ID, And then when it came in, you had to come in and pick it up. Oh, Wesley, what about the people who have no car, who use public transportation? Now you're requiring them to spend money on transportation to go pick the ID up. For everybody who's watching, I just need y'all to understand, this is how these trifling Republicans want to pimp us, and then they use blackface to sit here and talk about my history and my parents and who grew up in Jim Crow, and I did this here, and I served my country, and me and 3 of my siblings, we all went to West Point. Oh, we're just good old Americans. And the problem is you can't get no voter ID. It's because you don't have any personal responsibility. You just lazy. You can't get out there and spend the money to go get you a passport. Well, why in the hell do you need a passport if your ass can't afford to leave the country? See, the arrogance of people like Congressman Wesley Hunt is they don't want to accept the reality that everybody's not like the rest of us. I've had this conversation with some other black people. Roland, I don't understand what's the problem. I'm like, oh, so your college-educated ass, you are sitting here saying, well, I have this and I have that. Why can't they? Since I went ahead and brought up college educated. You saw Wesley Hunt sit there and pull out his right to carry card and oh, Wesley, did you also forget that in your state of Texas, in my home state, that if you are a student at Texas Southern University, you probably ain't never even walked on that campus, or at Texas A&M, or Texas Tech, or Sam Houston State, or North Texas, or any state institution, that's a state ID. Oh, I'm sorry, in Texas, you can't use your government state ID from your state college because your fellow Republicans banned them. Oh, but you can use your gun permit. You can use your gun ID, but you can't use your state ID. We know what the games are. And so you sat there for 6 minutes and said a whole bunch of nothing. And all you are down with are denying people the opportunity. And here's the other thing that's so crazy. I filled up my voter registration card many times, had it certified. They mail it back to me. It used to be I could just come in with my voter registration card, had my name, had my address, had everything on it. They look down, here it is, go vote. But no. And I also noticed, Wesley, you didn't bring up the more than 1,000 voting locations that were shut down after Shelby v. Holder. I noticed you didn't talk about how voting locations in Mississippi were being changed the night before the election, so on election day, folk didn't know where to vote. I noticed you ain't discussed any of those things in your little tirade about personal responsibility when it comes to getting your voter ID, and how the left, they out here saying that black people, we not smart enough to get us a voter ID. I noticed how you also didn't say nothing, how they changed the rules in the Dakotas that impacted Native Americans being able to vote on their reservation. Oh, I got it. You had 6 minutes of testimony and you didn't have enough time to cover all of those things. I understand. You were too busy giving us the history of your black family growing up in Jim Crow America. Rebecca?
You know, I could be petty and talk about how corny he sounded. I could be petty to talk and say that it sounded like he was talking through his teeth, but I'll bite. I'll actually, talk to the substance. The issue with people like Wesley is that he completely ignores the math. We all know ever since the Shelby decision, we know since 2013 that the racial turnout gap has steadily increased. And it's not because, oh, Black people are apathetic and don't want to vote. That's not it, because Black folks are the most rational and informed voting bloc in this country. That's the first thing. But the reason why that gap has increased, the racial turnout gap has increased, is because the very jurisdictions, the very cities and towns that used to have to get pre-clearance from the Justice Department before they changed their local rules, and they had to do that because they were trying to keep Black folks from being able to vote. Those same counties, those same areas, their racial turnout gap is twice the rate as the racial turnout gap anywhere else in the country. So we know that there is an intentional anti-Black racist attack on Black voters to ensure that those who support white supremacy in this country, those who are anti-democratic in this country, stay in power. We know that that's the numbers. And just to give a tangible impact, we know in 2022, there were 14 million Black voters missing. If Shelby didn't happen, if the Arkansas case didn't happen, then we know that there would have been probably another 14 million Black voters who would have been likely to turn out to vote in 2022. So we know that this is a systemic, targeted issue. But finally, the final thing I'll say about Wesley, I'm always suspicious about Black people who want to be the token Black person in a sea of white faces. And that's what Wesley is. At the end of the day, Wesley, you act as if you speak on behalf of Black America, but guess what? You don't. You don't even represent a congressional district that have many African Americans in your congressional district. So you speak for those white folks there, for those folks who don't want Black people to be able to vote. That's who you speak for. So own it. Instead of trying to, showboat in Congress as if you are a WWE WrestleMania announcer, just say what it is. You look down on other Black people. So I'll always be suspicious of people like you who want to rise above Blackness when I think being Black is something to celebrate.
I noticed, Gavin, that Wesley did not talk about, go to my iPad, he didn't talk about this case. Folks might remember the Black man who waited in line for 6 hours at Texas Southern University just to cast his ballot. He was photographed, a video was taken. That man was thrown into a 2-year legal limbo because a Republican lawyer saw him on television. And this right here was it right here, the last of the voting line at TSU. This is March 2020. Some people waited for 6 hours. He was the last person in line. So it was talked about. Well, guess what? Then that pathetic indicted thug, Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton, indicted this brother on 2 counts of illegal voting, held him on a $100,000 bond. And so he was on parole. He spent 2 years in legal limbo. A DA, a district judge in Montgomery County, dismissed the case. Then the Attorney General's office refiled the charges, this time in Harris County, and the matter finally came to a close when a grand jury determined last summer that no crime had occurred. And so guess what? This brother who was committed, this brother who wanted to exercise his power, this is what he says. He's not going to vote again. I know I'm not. I mean, I care. He's no longer on parole and is eligible to vote. He goes, I mean, I care. But if I had to go through all of that just to vote, no. What happened in Florida last year when they arrested several Black and Hispanic and some white folks accusing them of voting illegally. Well, guess what? The judges threw out all those particular cases, but that wasn't the point. The point was to serve as a chilling effect and to say, if you ever serve time in prison, this might be you. That's why they're still going after Crystal Mason 7 years after the fact. This is what Republicans do. But I noticed Congressman Wesley Hunt, he didn't bring up none of this.
Well, Roland, you know what else he didn't bring up? He didn't bring up the fact that Republicans in my home state of Georgia passed Senate Bill 202 after the election of 2020, which now makes it a crime to give food and water to people like that gentleman there in Texas who may have been waiting in line for 6 hours or longer. And like you said, they've been closing down polling stations and all of that. So, of course, Representative Hunt didn't mention any of that. He said it's not the 1950s anymore. It's 2024. That's the point. It's 2024, and we're still trying to make it harder to vote. I'm not sure how much he and Ben Carson and Byron Donalds and Tim Scott are getting paid for all this, but it's sad. And it's not because I think all black people have to think the same way. But when it comes to issues like voting rights, I guess to me, it's just pretty simple. You either want to make it easier to vote or you want to make it harder to vote. You either think that the right to vote ought to be expanded or it ought to be contracted. And it would be one thing if, there was some evidence that there's voter fraud. We know that those are lies. That couldn't be further from the truth. But Congressman Hunt, by talking about the results of his election, all of that, he said the quiet part out loud. He made it clear that this is all about power. Republicans are scared that they're going to get beat, so they know they got to rig the rules of the game. And we can trace all of this back. We talked about Shelby County in 2013, but this can all be traced back. These modern attempts to suppress the black vote can be traced back to the election of Barack Obama. And we know it's been an open season on voting rights since then, of course, in 2013. And I can say, going back to being a Georgia voter, that I've experienced the effects of SB 202. It's now harder for me to vote by mail. There are more steps that I have to take. When I was voting in the primaries just last week, I got a call from the voting office saying that they mailed me the wrong ballot and they were going to cancel it. I have no idea what is going on. This is for someone like me who's relatively privileged and politically engaged. So think about what that means for so many other voters. The last thing I'll say, he tried to make it seem like, oh, we got all these people voting, these rules these new laws aren't really being a barrier to black voters. We might have more black people voting, but that's not because of anything he has to say. That's because of the sheer will and determination of the voters in our community. It's a testament to the magnificence of Stacey Abrams, and it's a testament to the dedication and the hard work of people like Rebecca, who just spoke before me. So that's what I got to say, Roland.
Greg, Wesley Hunt posted this on his little Facebook page. Go to my iPad. Emily and I are honored to exercise our right to vote. Hashtag I voted. Yeah, you and Emily voted, but y'all sure as hell don't mind stopping a lot of black and brown folk and poor white folk and young voters from voting. We know that you have on record where a clerk in Wisconsin in 2020 says she moved an early voting location off of a college campus because too many young white kids were voting Democrat. And they moved it to a location further out with a small parking lot. See, these are the games Republicans play. They don't want to make it easier to vote. They love talking about the troops. And you heard Wesley sitting there talking about, I served my country, and me and my family, we served our country in the military. Oh, but they want to make it harder. They want to get rid of ballot drop boxes. They want to cut early voting locations. They want to rig elections and steal them so they can win because they're actually on record. The former Georgia Speaker of the House who died last year said, if we pass all these voting laws, we will never win another election. They know it. They've said it. If you expand the opportunities for Americans to vote, Republicans say we will never win because they don't want to win on policy. They want to win by cheating.
Absolutely. And they call that election integrity. Anytime you hear the white nationalists refer to election integrity, what they mean is voter suppression. I appreciate you, Rebecca. You took the high road. I'm not going to take the high road because I have an example in Roland S. Martin, who just showed that man's wife and goaded me into mentioning that. I mean, they got this man out of central casting. There seems to be a batch of these Negroes with the crushed larynxes. Maybe it's their esophagus. I'm not sure. Maybe it's the trachea that allows them to talk like that and say, back in the 40s and 50s. What is this ragged projection? Your whole throat is constricted trying to prove to white people. This is the Negro who, having pulled out his 50th or 60th ID when he's led away in handcuffs, is still trying to convince these people that he's on their side because he just can't believe that somehow all of his loyalty won't be rewarded one day in heaven. I mean, he's already gotten an earlier prize, but yeah, to the point. I mean, and I appreciate again what you said, brother. We just lost this week the great Dory Ladner, a great civil rights warrior and titan out of Hattiesburg, Mississippi. She and her sister Joyce, member of Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, a sister who headed up the local office of the Council of Federated Organization, of course, was there when they had the bombing of 16th Street Baptist Church, the funeral for 3 of the 4 girls who were killed that day in September 1963, and then followed that up by being at the center of Freedom Summer. And Dory Ladner said, "I was born to rebel. I was born to fight." We have to understand that these people cannot be reasoned with, because it isn't about laying out facts. They know the facts. But as you say, Roland, they just want to win. So when you get a crushed larynx Negro like that, a Negro who was in the House of Representatives, shout out to the Texas 38th for sending your mascot to the federal legislature. When you see him testify as he did before the Judiciary Committee's subcommittee having the hearing on the John Lewis Voting Rights Act, no doubt that little Lynn Graham, who is the ranking member of the Senate on that committee, reached out to the other side and said, "Mascot, come here, because we got little Timmy over here in South Carolina, but we need you to come in here and talk about going to the polls and pulling out your 6 or 7 IDs. But here's the little memo, son. Let's be very clear. The ID that counts the most in this country is the ID you came out of your black mother's womb with. And no piece of paper, no ability to choke your voice and show up with your wife and say that you all respected none of that's going to save you." One other thing I'll say, as you know, Roland, because they live in the neighborhood with your family, you know, my sister and brother-in-law, my niece and nephew live in Texas, and I got a lot of good friends in Texas. And when they take their teenage children to go get driver's licenses and learner's permits, they have found now that you have to make an appointment, and they take maybe 5 walk-ins a day to get a driver's license. And in Texas, you can wait as long as 3 damn months. To anybody got a teenage child in Texas, go ahead, Roland, because you know about.
Oh, no. I just had to. My driver's license expired before my birthday, and I literally had no idea. So I called. I told my parents I was flying in, and they said, "Hey, why don't you go to the driver's license location in Midlothian, in south of Dallas, because it's small, not a lot of traffic." All right, so I go in. Now, mind you, I got a driver's license. I'm just getting it renewed. I go in. They go, "Oh, no, we still have the COVID rules in place. You have to make an appointment." I go, "Excuse me? I have to make an appointment?" "Oh, yeah, it's on the website." So I'm like, look, I'm only in town. I literally only flew in town to get it renewed. So, or it may have been around voting as well. I may have voted, and then I said, well, I'm here. So then I'm like, what the hell? So now all of a sudden I call State Senator Royce West's office saying, "Hey, who do you know one of these offices where I can just go ahead and get it renewed?" I then go to another location in Dallas County. I said, "Well, man," I start thinking. I said, "Hold on, let me try to figure out a location where a lot of black folk gonna be at." And so I go in, and parking lot's jam packed, and the woman at the front, the Latina woman, she's like, "No, you gotta get an appointment." And so it's telling me how long it's gonna take, and I'm like, "Are you serious? I'm going back out of town tomorrow." And the brother who was behind the desk, the brother was like, "Everything good?" And I was like, "Here's what's going on." He was like, "Come on." And so she's like, and then she get attitude.
Wow.
She then goes, "Oh, I guess it's good to be special." Yes, it is. And so it was probably gonna be about a 3 or 4 hour wait, because I think they gave it to me. I think I was like number 68 or something. Now, mind you, the office I left, it was only like about 4 or 5 people. Mm-hmm. Okay, there's about 60 some odd people there, and so I'm chilling. I'm reading my phone. I'm like, no problem. Let me go ahead and do this here, until this one sister came out. A bunch of them were like on break. And because I was like, all the empty cubicles. So I then And so then I was like, hold up, that's the break room. So I switched my seat so that way they wouldn't see the back of my head. So they walked out, and then the sister, she was like, I walked out, she was like, come here. She said, nah, she said, but man came in and told you was sitting out here. She said, no, we got to get your driver's license. And so went ahead, knocked it out, processed it, had my driver's license the following week. But they literally, what you just described, they were literally going to try to make this a 3 to 4 month wait.
And if you weren't Roland Martin, it would have been a 3 or 4 month wait.
Yep. And so that's what Wesley Hunt won't talk about.
No question.
Wesley Hunt will not talk about the slow walk. And in fact, Wesley Hunt, why don't you go back when Scott Walker was the governor of Wisconsin, when the federal judge called his ass in and said, why y'all slow walking voter IDs? See, Wesley want to act like we don't know. And then Wesley, do I need to remind you, when the leader in Pennsylvania in 2000, I think it was 2012 or 16, it was 2012, he stood up and said, quote, because of voter ID, Mitt Romney is going to win Pennsylvania over Obama. That's literally what he said. Mm-hmm. So see, Wesley act like we don't know. No, Wesley, we do know. So you can sit here and trot out your little 6 IDs and pull all that crap out. But real black folks know what's going on and how your party, especially those racists in Texas, how they are changing the laws to rig the elections because y'all cannot compete on policy.